friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Tori, and it's been a little while. I apologize for that, but today I'm here because I had to get something off my chest. I wanted to talk through something with you guys about my reading habits from last year in 2023, because I've been doing a lot of soul searching and a lot of thinking about how I read, how BookTube has affected my reading, what has changed since I started reading for BookTube, and kind of talk a little bit about my experiment last year. And that experiment was I read 100 books in 2023. I wanted to see if I could do it. It was one of those milestone bucket list things where I wanted to be able to say that I'd read 100 books in a year. And so I got really close towards the end of 2023 and I figured, you know what, let's go for it and see what we can do. And I feel like 2023 was really the year I learned so many things about myself as a reader, both in terms of the amount of books that I was reading, the type of books that I was reading, and I'm definitely wanting to explore more of that. I was pushing it last year, and I was reading on average between like 7 to 9 books per month, which for me was a lot. I know that there's a huge spectrum of comfort zones when it comes to how many books we all read in a month, in a year, whether you're a BookTube creator, whether you're a reader that follows along with your favorite channels. And there's a lot of discussion over people wishing that they could read more books like this person, or people talking about how they really need to slow down and just enjoy the reading space a little bit more, that they read too fast. There's a lot of conversation about this topic specifically, but I wanted to add my 2 cents and just talk a little bit about my experience from last year. There is no right answer when it comes to how many books you should or can read in a year. I think that is incredibly individual and is very different for all of us, and that's totally normal and fine. So I don't want this to come across as people who do read hundreds of books in a year are doing something wrong, or that if you don't read 100 books in a year, you're not reading enough. There's none of that here. This is just my personal experience and what worked and what didn't work for me. Because I know that there are other people out there. While I had a hard time with 100 books in a year, I know there are people that read a lot more than that in a year and they love it and they can handle that. And that's awesome because they've figured out the process that works for them. I also know people that read a lot less than that and they just have a great time with the books that they read. So really it is an individual experience, and whatever number of books you read in a year should be the right number of books for you, not for anybody else. The first thing I want to talk about is how reading more books for BookTube has affected my ability to read series specifically. This was one of the areas that I have noticed the most in the last few years on BookTube, and especially last year. I did end up finishing some awesome fantasy series and they were amazing and I had an awesome time with them. I finished the Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee. I finished the Long Price Quartet by Daniel Abraham. I finished what else did I finish? The First Law by Joe Abercrombie. So I did get through some trilogies last year, and that was one of my goals, because trilogies, when you're on BookTube, trilogies tend to feel a little bit more doable. They're a commitment, but they're not something like a 10-book series like Malazan or, you know, something of that nature. So I felt really comfortable doing some trilogies last year, and especially it was helpful that I vlogged 2 out of the 3 of the ones that I mentioned, and that also helped because I knew every month I was going to be producing a vlog for each book in the series, and that really helped keep me on task and keep me focused to finish through the series. Being a BookTube creator definitely makes it more difficult, I feel, to just binge through a series, because for me personally, I was trying to try so many different authors and so many different series that I read a lot of first books in a series and then was on to the next series. And part of that, again, this is all my personal experience. I know it's different for everybody, and I also have the added factor of ADD, so I have a hard time focusing anyways. But I used to binge series all the time. I would get into a series that I really loved and I'd binge my way through it in a month or 2 months. And I don't do that anymore. And I think part of that was the pressure of reading the next book is a big factor in that, I think. And that's like kind of an overarching thing that I noticed, especially last year, is this pressure I was putting on myself to read the next book, to have more content, to have bigger, wrap-ups. And I kind of talked a little bit about that when I nixed my monthly TBR videos last year, because I wanted to have more freedom, and I was recognizing that I was putting too much pressure on myself to read very specific books, which isn't always a bad thing, but for me personally, it was kind of taking some of the joy and spontaneity out of my reads, and I wanted to get a little bit about that back. And I don't know that I've completely broken that habit yet, because I still have sort of TBRs for every month, which is fine. But I'm continually working to give myself more and more freedom through the month, to bring myself back to a point where I can just go to my shelves and pick something that looks interesting that day, because that is something that I really found myself missing back in 2023. So series, I got off on a tangent. Who's surprised? I kind of have forgotten how to read series or binge series. And even when I want to continue to the next book, there's that crushing guilt that I feel, because there's a huge TBR off to my side, and I feel like, well, okay, I tried this author, but there's so many other ones that I want to try and talk about and be part of the discussion on, that I'm going to put this series down so I can read something else. I want to be able to binge series again. I want to feel that immersion in a series and just let go and let myself, hustle all the way through it if I want to, instead of feeling like I have to pause for something else. Now, that's another part of the pressure for me, is I'm a very social person, and I love being part of the discussions on things. And BookTube is a place of amazing discussions that are happening all around us all the time. And it's so hard not to want to be a part of all those discussions, and that's where the FOMO comes in, right? Everybody's talking about this book, and you're like, oh man, I had a plan of what I was going to read, and I had a book that looked really exciting, but everybody's talking about this other book. I really want to try it and see what all the fuss is about so that I can be part of the conversation. And that's hard. For me at least, that's a really hard pressure to resist, because I'm such a social person. I want to be part of those conversations. I want to have something to say. I want to be able to watch the spoiler reviews. I want to be able to watch the live stream discussions and know what everybody's talking about. So that is also a pressure, I think, that added to me just wanting to read as many different books as possible so that I could join in as many discussions as possible. And my extroverts and social butterflies out there, I'm sure this will resonate with you, but I don't want to be left out. And so it is definitely a pressure from my end to want to be part of all the discussions, which isn't possible. And I'm learning how to accept that, I can enjoy watching other people talk about books I haven't read, and that's okay. I don't need to feel an intense amount of pressure because I haven't read the same book. I've also noticed that it's not that I follow trends per se, but I definitely am more influenced by the hype of what's being talked about around me. So that is another thing in 2024 that I'm working on, is kind of taking a step back and delving into some of the books I want to read, regardless of when they were published or who's talking about them. I've been going back and reading some classic fantasy lately, and I've been loving it, because some of these books are books that I don't really hear people talking about anymore, and it's been really fun to kind of have that feeling that I'm discovering something new, even though it's been around for ages and a lot of people have read these books. It's fun to feel like it's almost like a treasure hunt, like I'm discovering some new vein of precious metal all over again. And I really like that feeling. So that's something that really drove my decision to do my Cosmic Footsteps book club this year, where I'm going back and reading, older fantasy written by female authors, and just kind of rediscovering some of those books that don't get talked about on BookTube as much. And also, let's talk about our TBR veterans, shall we? Because I'm constantly distracted by the shiny and, this friend is reading this book and these people are talking about this series, and I get pulled in so many different directions at once, oftentimes I have these books that have been sitting on my TBR for literally years, sometimes series that I know that I've really wanted to pick up, that I will probably love reading. And I just keep putting them on the back burner because it feels more like a personal project than a group project. And I always tend to give way to the things that other people are doing or reading, or things that are new and exciting in the book community. And all of my TBR veterans just kind of have to get pushed back to the back burner again. And that's another thing here in 2024 that I want to work on, is going back. And that's, again, another project for this year, is the Read My Shelves challenge that I am doing with Kay's Hidden Shelf and Andrew's Wizardly Reads and some other people. Because I was getting so anxious, and I bought so many books last year, you guys. Like, it was not good. It was good, but I've built a library now, and now I want to read it, right? And we talk a lot about how collecting books and reading books are very different hobbies, but also I buy books because I want to read them. So this year I'm really going to embrace that Read Your Shelves challenge, because it's the books that you always see when you walk past your shelves. It's the one that you glance at and you're like, man, I've been wanting to read that book for ages. Well, soon, right? And then you don't think about it for another 2 months until you pass your bookshelf and you notice, and you're like, man, I really want to read that book. The financial aspect of it too, when you're constantly chasing the new shiny books and buying new things, you know, that's a financial commitment, and this year I want to have less of one. So I definitely want to take some time to honor my TBR veterans this year and give them the time and attention that they deserve. I mean, Sword of Kaigen was a great example of that. That was a book that I've had on my TBR for ages. Everybody has been telling me for ages how much I'm going to love it. I knew I was going to love it, and I kind of just let it sit there because I knew I was going to love it. So I was like, well, that'll keep, you know. And I read it in January because I was like, you know what? Enough is enough. We are reading this book because it is time. And I loved it. I had a great time with it. It was a really good book. Shocking. So let's talk about reading slumps, because, man, let me tell you what, I went through it last year and even at the beginning of this year. And when I'm constantly focusing on the number of books that I'm reading and going to the next book, and okay, I finished that book, let's get another one in. I've got 5 days left before the end of the month. I can fit another book or two in here. You're not really in the moment, right? You're always forward projecting, and you're not sitting in the moment as much with the book that you're reading. It doesn't mean that I didn't enjoy a lot of the books that I read last year or really get a lot out of the books that I read last year, because I did. But I was constantly looking toward that next book, even when I was in the middle of the one I was reading. And that was hard. And I definitely think that it affected my retention ability for the books that I was reading, which I don't want. I want to be able, I have a hard time retaining things anyways. And I want to be able to just relax into the read and be in the present, in the moment, a lot more than I was when I was reading last year. So that's another thing that I noticed. This is a very rambly video, I apologize, but that's what you guys signed up for if you're subscribed to my channel. So yeah, if you haven't already subscribed to my channel and you enjoyed this rambling, please subscribe to the channel and drop a like on this video and leave a comment, because I would love to chat with you about what you've learned about yourself in the last year or years of reading, and what is a comfortable number of books in a year for you. Like, what is your comfort zone for reading? Do you like to read 10 books a year, 30 books a year, 50 books a year, 500 books a year? Like, where's your comfort zone? And when do you know that you are pushing yourself a little bit too much with reading? I would love to hear from you down in the comments, because the conversations are why I am here. I'm sure I'll have more to discuss as I work through more of the things that I've learned about myself in the last year as a reader, because I definitely had kind of an enlightening year in 2023 in terms of reading, and that was really cool, and I want to talk about that more. But this was something that I just noticed, that reading 100 books a year, for me personally, was too much. And I'm glad that I recognized that and was able to learn from it, and I'm glad that I did it, because it taught me a lot. So thank you guys for coming to this very disjointed video. I hope that you are all having a fantastic week. I hope you are reading 5-star reads, and I will see you in the next video. That's why I picked them up in the first place. I don't want to just put them on my shelf and never think about them again. I want to actually read them. And so the Read Yourselves